Major protest in the capital, Shahbag Square, right next to the Dhaka University campus. There's protests going on across the country. One in Bangla Motor, just about a half a kilometer from here, where the Student Citizen Party is gathering. People from all walks of life are participating in this protest. They said they want justice. They want the asylum brought from India, who apparently escaped to India through the border for killing the student leader Usman Hadi. There's a strong anti-India sentiment in the protest. They're saying that India has influenced the current political situation in Bangladesh before the election. And they said a lot of the former lawmakers who belong to the last ruling party under former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina are taking shelter there, and they should face justice and be extradited to Bangladesh. Last night there was major protests in the capital. 2 major media buildings were burned. Fortunately, nobody was killed or hurt in those incidents, but both the media inside the building was vandalized and they were set on fire. People are concerned in the city about the law and order, heavy security presence. This put Bangladesh in a political uncertainty right before the general elections scheduled for February 12th next year. Tanvir Chowdhury, Al Jazeera, Dhaka.
Well, more than a year after the ousting of Sheikh Hasina, extrajudicial killings are still being reported in Bangladesh. Indeed, human rights groups say at least 40 people were unlawfully killed or disappeared between August 2024 and September 2025. Victims include political activists, detainees held without warrants, alleged criminals, and indeed even bystanders. Activists say the patterns of abuse mirror those of previous governments and alleges that security agencies operate without meaningful independent oversight. So let's explore all of this now. Joining us from Dhaka is Taqbir Huda, who's a human rights lawyer and former South Asia regional researcher at Amnesty International. Taqbir, thanks for joining us here. As we've just heard, enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings were well known during Sheikh Hasina's time in power, but why are they still carrying on under the interim leadership?
Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, that is the regrettable truth, that some of the patterns of violence which the uprising united against that were occurring during Sheikh Hasina's rule continue to persist. And that just shows you that some structural forms of violence, such as police brutality and violence by state security forces, are so structural that you could have the most progressive-looking interim government in charge, but they still persist. One could say it's because, by and large, the same security forces which launched violence against protesters are still not fully under the operational control of the transitional government.
But it's a complicated picture, isn't it? I mean, the killing of Sharif Hadi probably wouldn't come under the orbit of what we're discussing here. It's a different situation, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, Hadi's shooting is quite unprecedented because gun violence in Bangladesh is really quite rare. Traditionally, political dissidents are hit through sticks and stones. But his killing, it's a really chilling turning point in Bangladesh's politics. But what is even more chilling is what unfolded in the wake of his death. So, the oldest and the largest newspapers in Bangladesh being burned down overnight, only for being labeled pro-Indian, but without any such evidence that they were pro-Indian. It's one of the biggest blows to press freedom in Bangladesh, and the fact that the law enforcement agencies were not there despite incitement for the violence occurring online really speaks volumes.
Okay, but essential background to this is that national elections will be held on February the 12th next year, ending this interim period since Hasina's departure. What is Hasina's and her Awami League party's position on those elections, and how is it impacting what we're seeing on the streets in Bangladesh right now, all this upsurge in violence and protest?
So here's a real crucial piece of the puzzle. Awami League cannot contest in these elections due to a series of legislation that prohibits it from contesting as a prohibited entity. The interim government calls it a temporary suspension, but its effect is like an absolute ban. So the only way it can participate right now is through creating disruption and chaos. It had initially asked the interim government to allow Awami League to contest, but there were protests demanding for the ban and prohibition of Awami League, which the interim government ultimately, succumbed to. And that is why we see that Awami League obviously would not want this election to proceed. And we are seeing, disparate acts of violence occurring across the country, which many are attributing to the Awami League.
Okay, and that's, I guess, what I'm driving at. Hadi was an outspoken critic of India, where Hasina has been in exile. Hadi had publicly stated that he had received dozens of death threats from fugitive supporters of Hasina. That's according to officials. To what extent, then, is this unrest being fomented from outside the country?
I mean, there's obviously credible reason to believe that it is. And, how these suspected killers managed to, according to certain reports, managed to escape to India. And we know that not only Sheikh Hasina, but many from the upper brass of the Awami League are now seeking safe haven in India, despite credible evidence existing that they were involved in gross violations of human rights. So India's role in this entire situation cannot be underemphasized. India needs to understand that it must cooperate with Bangladesh to end impunity for the violations that took place not only during the uprising, but the violations that are continuing to take place, possibly with support and coordination from those within its territory.
Taqbir, one more question to you, briefly, if you would. The Nobel Prize winner, Muhammad Yunus, of course, has been interim leader since Sheikh Hasina's departure, but it seems he hasn't been able to control the streets, and there was a lot of hope that he would bring peace. Where has he gone wrong?
Well, in a nutshell, there has been too much posturing, not enough regaining of operational control. So when I say that saying the right things with the right prose is not going to solve the mess that Bangladesh is in. The sinking ship narrative works for the first 6 months, but it's been over a year. There is no excuse as to why an interim government will have failed to regain control over the law and order situation. Incidents of mob violence, not only as we saw last night, but over this entire year, attacks against minorities incited online. These could easily have been prevented through greater coordination with the law enforcement officials and also tech companies whose platforms are being used to launch, these attacks and coordinate them. So in a nutshell, the focus should really be on regaining operational control and less posturing.
Okay, very interesting getting your analysis. Taqbir, I do appreciate that. That's Taqbir Huda speaking to us there.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.